It started with a knock, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the calm summer air like a knife. Michael, a quiet man who had spent over 30 years in his modest wheelchair home, had never imagined this kind of disruption in his peaceful life. As he approached the door, his mind raced. Was it a neighbor? A delivery? But when he opened it to find two officers on his doorstep there, expressions unreadable, his world tilted. "We're here to investigate a disturbance," one of them said, holding a clipboard. Michael's heart sank. His days were simple. Coffee by the pond, tending to his lilies, the hum of a peaceful neighborhood wrapping around him like a warm blanket. A disturbance? From him? The idea was absurd, but he kept his composure and invited them inside. Minutes later, Annette, the new, high-strung neighbor with her polished exterior and frosty demeanor, appeared, hurling accusations that left him frozen. "He doesn't belong here," she snapped, her voice venomous. "He's ruining our village." Michael stood stunned, the weight of her words crashing over him. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was personal, tinged with prejudice that stung deeper than he thought possible. For a man who had built a life of quiet dignity, being labeled an outsider in his own home was unimaginable. What could drive someone to such extremes? This tale of betrayal, defiance, and one man's fight for his reputation unfolds here on Tio Stories, where the truth reveals itself in ways no one expects. Stay tuned to see how Michael turns the tables in a battle he never asked for but refuses to lose. Michael's morning routine was his sanctuary. The rising sun painted his garden in soft amber hues as he brewed his coffee and watered the vibrant blooms he'd nurtured over the years. It was a routine of peace and solitude, a daily reminder of why he'd chosen this quiet corner of Wiltshire decades ago. But that tranquility was shattered the moment Annette, the new neighbor, moved in next door. Dear life stories at first. He dismissed her cold reception. Everyone adjusts differently, he reasoned, and perhaps she wasn't accustomed to small-town friendliness. Yet Annette's glares, her sharp remarks, and the way she refused even the most basic, neighborly gestures unsettled him. She's just private, he told himself, clinging to the belief that time would soften her edges. But as days turned into weeks, Annette's behavior took a darker turn. She stayed behind drawn curtains, venturing out only to cast disapproving looks at Michael's modest home. One sweltering afternoon, while Michael lounged by a small above-ground pond, she stood on her porch, phone in hand, snapping pictures. When he caught her eye and waved in an attempt to diffuse the tension, she turned away with a sneer. A heavy knot of unease settled in his chest. Things escalated quickly. One day, as he was pruning his lilies, Michael was startled by a loud knock on the door. Two officers stood there, their expressions neutral but firm. "We've received complaints about noise and disturbances originating from this address," one explained. Michael blinked, momentarily stunned. Noise? Disturbances? His life was a symphony of quiet moments. He led the officers inside, showing them the empty, serene rooms and the backyard garden that had been his haven for years. As the officers left, the truth behind the complaint became horrifyingly clear. Annette appeared at the edge of her property, arms crossed and voice laced with venom. "He doesn't belong here," she declared loud enough for the officers and half the neighborhood to hear. "He's a drifter, pretending to fit in. This village deserves better." Michael's mind reeled. It wasn't just an insult, it was an accusation that cut to the core of his identity. A man who had worked tirelessly to build a life in this community was now being painted as an intruder. He clenched his fists, his instinct to defend himself warring with his resolve to remain composed. "I've lived here for 30 years, he finally said, his voice steady despite the rage bubbling beneath. "This is my home." But Annette wasn't finished. Over the next few weeks, her campaign intensified. Whispers reached Michael's ears at the local grocer. Shopkeepers who had once greeted him warmly now avoided his gaze. Posters appeared around the village. Grainy photos of Michael in his garden captioned with damning words. Does this man make you feel safe? Demand a safer neighborhood. Each new attack chipped away at Michael's composure. He spent sleepless nights wondering what he had done to deserve such malice. His garden, once a refuge, now felt like a stage, where Annette played out her vendetta. Yet even in his despair, Michael's resolve hardened. She won't win, he whispered to himself, clutching a mug of tea with trembling hands. I won't let her take this from me. Determined to fight back, Michael sought allies. Mrs. Bennett, his elderly neighbor, offered unwavering support. That woman's delusional, she said one evening over the fence. We all know who you are, Michael. She's the outsider here. Mr. Singh, whose security camera partially overlooked Michael's property, provided crucial footage of Annette trespassing, peering into windows, and even snapping branches from his lilies to stage her photos. Armed with evidence and the encouragement of those who still believed in him, Michael consulted a solicitor. The legal process was daunting, but he poured his energy into gathering statements, compiling footage, and filing a formal complaint. The day he handed over the stack of evidence, he felt a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. When the court summons arrived at Annette's door, her smug confidence faltered. At the hearing, Michael sat quietly as the solicitor laid out the case. The CCTV footage spoke volumes. Annette crouched by his fence, her phone trained on his home, trespassing and tampering with his garden. Witness testimonies painted her as a woman obsessed with tearing down a neighbor who had done nothing wrong. Even the police report from the day she called them, with false claims worked against her. Annette's defense was thin. She clung to the narrative that she was protecting the village. But the magistrate saw through her facade. This is harassment, the magistrate declared. And it stops now. Annette was issued an antisocial behavior order, forbidding her from approaching Michael or continuing her defamatory campaign. She was also ordered to pay damages and legal fees. A small but significant victory for Michael. The aftermath was swift. Annette, once a force of disruption, became a pariah. The villagers who had believed her lies now turned their backs, embarrassed by their complicity. One by one, the defamatory posters disappeared, torn down by her own hand under the watchful eyes of the constables. Michael watched from his garden as she worked, a quiet satisfaction settling over him. Though the scars of Annette's campaign remained, Michael found solace in the support of his true neighbors. His garden, once tainted by her intrusion, became a place of healing again. The village, too, began to feel like home once more. Michael's story wasn't just one of endurance, but of reclaiming peace and standing firm in the face of prejudice and hatred. As he sat by his pond one afternoon, the sun warm on his face, he allowed himself a small smile. Annette's voice had once threatened to drown him, but now it was just another memory, one he had overcome with quiet strength and the truth on his side. Reflecting on the ordeal, Michael realized something profound. Peace isn't just about the absence of conflict. It's about protecting what matters most. His quiet life in Wiltshire wasn't defined by the accusations hurled at him or the rumors that had spread. It was defined by the decades of love and care he had poured into his home, his garden, and the community he cherished. This experience taught Michael that sometimes standing your ground means more than defending yourself. It's about showing others the power of integrity and perseverance. Annette had tried to isolate him, but her actions had only strengthened the bonds he shared with the people who truly knew him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Michael raised a glass to his garden, the village, and the simple beauty of a life reclaimed. "This is my home," he said softly, a smile tugging at his lips.